stuff in modern world culture. But if other cultural theories about Five Nights at Freddy's, you can on the left to learn how framing the game could very easily.
Want to play the guitar but don't know where to begin? Musician is the best way to get started. The app listens to you play and guides you step by step to tune up and play your first song. Whether you want to play rock, pop, country, or even ukulele shoegaze, you can learn at your own pace. Musician gives you instant feedback on your accuracy and timing, and fun and addictive gameplay tracks your progress and keeps you motivated. You learn the basics, chords, theory, and all your favorite songs. So grab your guitar, download Musician, and start playing.
We are a place where creative dreamers go to learn their craft. We are the people who fill the world with entertainment and technology that inspires us all. If you are searching for a place to learn, create, and build your dreams, you found it. We are Full Sail University. We take dreams seriously. Start here.
It's me, Michael. I'm fine. You'll be right where you said it would be. There was only one thing.
Nope. Not touching it. No, sirree, Bob. No way. You can mechanically wheeze all you want, Michael Eggs Benedict, Afton, Purple Guy, Jingleheimer, Schmidt, but I am not spending another 20 minutes trying to piece together whether you're Springtrap, whether you're Purple Guy, whether you're a second Purple Guy, and whether all of this requires yet another rewrite of the timeline. I am not doing it, at least not until the next book comes out in June. No siree, doggo. Today, the series that prompted lore-based theories to flood this channel is getting the old-school game theory treatment. That's right. Today, I'm tackling the science of Five Nights at Freddy's. Hello, Internet! Welcome to Game Theory, where today's Freddy theory is going to be a bit different. No source code deep dives, no rooting around for obscure Easter eggs, only hardcore, real-life research. Oh, but speaking of the source code, something really fascinating is going on right now. Scott Cawthon's two websites are having a conversation. Scott Games is saying things like, "You're crowding us. You can't tell us what to do anymore. We outnumber you." And the FNAF World website is replying with, "Be quiet. Yes, I can. You will do everything that I tell you to do." Which makes it seem like FNAF 6, Sins of the Father, it's my title, feel free to use it, Scotty C. It's going to be like an all-out animatronic Civil War-style battle against the OG creator William, a.k.a. Springtrap Afton. Oh, awesome! Would that be? Title, gameplay, boom, done. Feel free to use that idea as well. Meanwhile, in other FNAF updates, since a lot of you have been asking me on Twitter about my thoughts on this, the movie got itself canceled and then found itself a new production partner, Blumhouse Productions, the same guys who did Paranormal Activity, Oculus, The Purge, Get Out. Honestly, I think it's great news. Blumhouse has made a name for themselves by doing awesome movies on really tiny budgets, and FNAF as an indie franchise needs that cheaply made indie vibe to really make it scary. It doesn't need a big studio like Warner Brothers, where it used to be going in and meddling and trying to make it more family friendly so they can go in and sell more FNAF toys, and it becomes the next Minions or something. Low budget is the way to go because it forces you to get creative. So this news actively made me excited for the movie. A video game movie based on FNAF. Seriously, all the subs to film theorists better get themselves ready for a huge helping of Freddy when that movie rolls around. Anyway, enough updates. I think that covers all the FNAF-related things that you guys have been asking me about on Twitter. On to the episode. This week I'm covering a topic I've wanted to do since the release of FNAF 4 back in 2015 and never had the opportunity to because I was always so busy trying to piece together the damn lore. And that is, can an animatronic actually kill you? Since, this series has a lot of animatronics, and a whole lot of death at the hands of animatronics. But more specifically, I want to focus on the bite. You know the one I'm talking about. Whether or not you believe this moment to be the bite of 83 or the bite of 87, whether or not the date really even matters anymore, one thing is clear. This is the moment that set in motion everything else in these games. Based on the evidence coming from 6 games and the Silverized book, William Afton, creator of the animatronics, suffers this tragedy where his son's head gets crushed in childhood bullying incidents. A few days later, the son dies of his wounds in his hospital bed, setting in motion Afton's quest to, quote, put him back together. Cut to scooping, sister locations, a dead daughter, and more missing children than you can shake a basket of exotic butters at, and all because of this one moment. The bite is treated as a freak accident, something that could have been helped. The horrific ending of an innocent childhood prank gone wrong. A series filled with haunted puppets and reincarnated skin suits starts with this. Just a random tragic incident that nobody could have stopped. A simple mechanical failure. Remember, this is before any of the suits are haunted. It's still just a regular old animatronic. But is that really true? Does a regular old animatronic actually have the ability to crush a child's skull? Or is there something a bit more sinister going on here? Let me just say this. I will never look at my last sister location theories the same way again. It's all thanks to the results of this episode's research. To begin to piece together the real danger these Disney rejects pose, we need to understand what makes them so dangerous in the first place. Sure, it might be easy to assume that Golden Red Bear and Golden Bonnie here are so deadly because they're spring-locked suits, but as we hear about FNAF's own call, the locks are only used to hold back the sharp, pointy innards so they can be worn in suit mode.
Turning the crank will recoil and compress the animatronic part around the sides of the suit, providing room to clamp it back. Please make sure the spring locks are back tight or choose the animatronic device on the stick.
It's also something that we witness up close and personal during Night 4 of FNAF's sister location. The spring locks hold back the robotic innards, and them unsnapping and releasing the mechanism is what makes them so deadly. But during FNAF 4's bite, Golden Freddy is already in robot mode. There would be no spring locks activated. They would not be snapping shut. To put it simply, the robot is operating like any normal animatronic would be, meaning that the danger is coming not from some weird, unique detail of FNAF burst-style robots, but rather from the same mechanisms that exist in any animatronic, be it in a fictional pizzeria to the creepy remnants of Big Bear Jamboree heads looking down at you from the Winnie the Pooh ride in Disneyland. Go ahead, look it up. There's some nightmare fuel for you. Or better yet, if you're at Disneyland, leave the Heckle Up and Boozle section of the ride, look behind you and look up. Oh, prepare for a surprise. Anyway, all things considered, to truly unwrap this theory, we need to know how normal animatronics actually work. Enter a man named Bert Rader, an engineer who used to build robots for Chuck E. Cheese. Turns out, how these things are built is actually a closely guarded trade secret. If I can pronounce my own. But in an article he did for Nuts and Bolts magazine back in 2009, he confirmed that almost every entertainment robot on the planet is built from one core technology, pneumatic actuators. What are those? Well, yo, listen up then. The homies know that when all the 6 ballers want to whip out their banging rides, yo, they install hydraulic lifts in their undercarriage, like Ramon from the Cars movie. Well, where hydraulics use oil and fluid.
To be the best, you need to work hard. You need to be quicker, smarter, and more determined. You need to have a bird's eye view while being fully aware of the tiniest details. You're a fierce competitor. Is your setup? Credit on the way until the full i7 processor.
So just lie down. We're going to focus the attention on the different parts.
The dynamics to do that sweet lifting, yo. Pneumatics is air pressure. You build up a bunch of air pressure and then that release moves whatever you want. A piston, a pulley, the deadly grin of a lifeless singing bear. They're used for everything from robots to build cars to the jaws of, well, Jaws and Universal Studios. Now, Rader doesn't specify how powerful pneumatic actuators and Chuck E. Cheese-style robots mouth would be, but we can go ahead and calculate a rough estimate. Whereas other actuators in the body and legs would have to be more powerful since they're moving larger, heavier chunks of robot, the ones in the mouth are smaller, more delicate. They only have to move a couple of ounces of plastic and metal for the jaws, teeth, and cheeks. The pneumatic tubes themselves are also only a couple inches long, meaning that they can only build up so much air pressure. All things considered, you're only going to need about 40 psi of air pressure max to do all of that. That's not a whole lot. It's like the pressure created from a strong breeze. So how the heck do a handful of small pistons powered by air create enough force to crack a child's skull wide open? They can't. You see, crushing a human skull ain't easy. The 22 bones in the human skull are there to protect the most important organ in our body from damage. And the whole thing has got a rounded structure to help disperse the forces applied to it. The strongest boxer in the world could punch you in the head at full force and it barely crack. But this perfectly normal Chuck E. Cheese wannabe not only cracks the crying child's head, but breaks through hard enough to cause severe trauma to the brain? How much force is needed to do that? Well, it's actually a tricky question. First, we gotta ask, how old is the victim? When you're first born, the skull is softer, moldable, since, it has to pass through narrow ligaments. Once it's made that journey, it has to be able to accommodate for your growing brain. So it has these soft spots called fontanelles that give the skull flexibility. So I immediately thought that our crying child birthday boy might be a bit easier of a nut to crack, considering how young he is, but the research didn't pan out that way. The soft spots disappear or ossify by the time that you're 9 to 18 months old. And I don't care how heartless of a killer you are, purple guy, you ain't letting your 1-year-old hobble his way home after a day of sitting terrified in a broom closet. Second, to answer the question I had to ask, what parts of the skull are we talking about? Because different sections have different thicknesses and, as a result, different strengths. According to research done by Tobias Matei, who studied children's light helmets and how they protect the skull, the thinnest region of the skull bone is about where your temples are. Lo and behold, that's exactly where our crying child is seeing most of the damage done. When he's placed in Golden Fredbear's mouth by the bullies, he's facing outward towards us, mostly facing the camera, meaning that the weaker sides of his skull are the ones that are having to deal with the crushing forces of fatigue. So, I looked it up. To fracture the skull there would require the equivalent of a 1,100-pound man or 500-kilogram woman, equal opportunity not being sexist here, to step on the head in that exact spot. But then again, that's just half the fracture. We're talking about a catastrophic head failure that impacts the brain. So we have to get a bit more specific and a bit harder of a fight. Luckily, I found a study looking into exactly that. Testing over 300 samples, some scientific madmen determined that human skull bone, when put under various kinds of stress, had a failure pressure of 1900 psi or 13 megapascals. 13 megapascals means that for every square meter of surface area, it takes 13 million newtons of force to break a skull open. Now, obviously, that number is hard to imagine without me giving you a real-world example of what it feels like. The challenge, though, is to accurately represent that pressure, we need to know how that pressure is being delivered. If I'm delivering a lot of pressure onto a small point, it's going to do a lot more damage than if I deliver that same amount of pressure across a wider surface area. Think of it like the difference of stepping onto a single nail versus laying on a bed of nails. One's a bloody good party trick, the other is just bloody. So think about it this way. 1 megapascal of pressure is about the pressure of an average bite. We're talking 13 times that. That is a lot of pressure. In our case, that pressure is being delivered by small animatronic teeth clamping down on either side of the crying child's head. So, a whole lot more like that single nail example than the bed of nails. But to find out just how powerful and deadly these teeth are, we're gonna need one thing: pixel measurements. We need to know the surface area of Freddy's teeth so that we can figure out how much force minimum those teeth are delivering. Now, obviously, we're going to have to approximate a bit since the game contains no real measurements to go off of. So instead, I started with Freddy's face. It's an Easter egg I never really addressed in the theories, but way back in vanilla FNAF 1, lots of theorists were talking about an oddly shaped smudge on Freddy's face. This smudge is in the shape of a hand. Now, granted, it isn't a golden suit, but as we see in that game, the two are comparable in size. Given that the average human hand is about 18.89 centimeters long, we can use this handprint to scale everything else. Freddy's head then is 32 centimeters wide, or about twice as wide as an adult head, which makes a lot of sense. You need something big enough to serve as a costume. Now, using a combination of images from different angles, we can use this to determine the dimensions of one tooth, which comes to 1.4 square centimeters. It looks like he was bitten with 8 teeth, 4 on the top and 4 on the bottom. This gives us a total surface area of 11.26 square centimeters. So, using the power of math, We can use this figure to determine how much force each tooth is biting down with. And that number is bone-chilling. 14,758 newtons. Why is that a bone-chilling number? Because that's the strength that a full-grown crocodile fights with. It's almost the strength of a great white shark bites. In order to deliver that amount of force, you would need two high-end industrial strength pneumatic actuators. These things are as long as your arm, and they need their own dedicated compressors coming out 100 pounds per square inch. I mean, your own teeth would crack if you beat down with that kind of force. And it is most certainly way overkill for moving the mouth of some cheap mascot at a sad sack eating a restaurant. It's almost like someone built these things to intentionally beat.
Says a disembodied voice as our story begins.
Be deadly. And there, ladies and gentlemen, is our smoking gun. When we last covered the lore of this series, myself, as well as other FNAF theorists like Tracicle and Dawko, concluded that William Afton was driven to his murderous rampage by tragic circumstances. His son was killed in the jaws of that machine, and so he dedicated his life to twisted experimentation on other children to bring his son back. Sure, it doesn't mean that William Afton kidnapping and killing tons of kids is okay, but it does make us sympathize with him on the he was driven to madness by this immense sadness. But if all this science today is truly correct, it proves that he was a madman all along. That even in the earliest days of Fredbear's Family Diner, William was making suits designed to kill, with mechanisms way overpowered for what they were meant to do. Any normal animatronic would have left a crying child with a few scratches, maybe some psychological scars, but that's about it. He'd be alive. But Afton, being the psychopath that he is, had other intentions. Not only did he create a deadly system with the spring locks, but even the basic robotics of his mascots were built to kill, something that he would continue to do throughout his career, particularly with the Funtime series. We all thought it was a freak accident that killed Afton's son, and at the end of the day, this death was completely avoidable. It was all Afton's fault. He only has his own twisted experiments to blame, claiming first his son, and eventually his daughter too. Man, gotta say, that really bites. But hey, that's just a theory. A game theory. Thanks for watching. 6 whole months since the FNAF theory? Wow, time flies. It's actually really nice to cover the series again with fresh eyes. I even figured out some new lore bits while working on this one. Stuff that I'm sure will show up in the next FNAF theory coming this summer. So if you haven't done it yet, make sure that you bite down hard on that subscribe button in 3, 2, 1. Right. And hey, might I recommend clicking the video that you see on screen right now? It's actually the first video that I did on FNAF. It's actually really interesting to see how the series changed in that amount of time. Anyway, that's it for today. I will see you all, or at least the number of you who enjoy our theories that aren't FNAF related, next week.
That's right. That's free. It's free. Free. Free.
Restaurants have always been there. A place to celebrate, to take a first date, to grab a meal between soccer practice or the end. And even though tables are empty, the kitchens are full, prepping everything so it's just right, keeping customers safe, and making the food as delicious as ever. They're still there for you. Now you can be there for them. While the doors may be closed, the kitchens are open for delivery.
A horde of the balloon boys emerged from the cave, shaking back and forth on unsteady feet, their pointy Not again! I hate these things, Jessica cried. You and me both, sister. You and me both. Up top. Can I find me up top because you're a fictional character? Hello, Internet. Welcome to Game Theory, where... Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen. Map 6 is canceled. Looks like I had more staying power than you, Scotty C. Let's be honest, though. It's going to be more delayed than canceled, really. And there's still the movie, The Merge, a second book just released, a third book coming soon, and a fourth one on the way. So just like the animatronics, the series itself keeps getting reborn in new forms with increasingly absurd names. Wither, Freddy, Nightmare, Chica, Not So Fun Time Franchise. Speaking of ridiculous new names for the same old cast of animals, let's talk about the latest addition to the roster, the Twisted Animatronics. Stars of a new FNAF book that came out at the end of June. Now, I'm gonna be honest, this book was definitely a step up from the first. It had 200 less pages. Oh, Sigma, you need a calendar, man! I mean, don't take that as too high of a compliment. In 200 pages, you still had a college robotics major going to the scene of a murder and then touching the victim, getting blood all up on her hands, and no one on the police force even bat an eye over the blatant crime scene tampering that was happening. Then there's the fact that in the book, multiple balloon boys, including BB, JJ, and whatever other ridiculous combination of letters you can come up with, are canon too. But you know what? I still gotta appreciate lines like page 183. You never know when a corpse may wander out of the shadows wearing a rabbit suit. Even the books have become self-aware of their own absurdity at this point. Now, at this point, Scott has made it clear that the books and the games are separate canons. And while that may be true, both are still shambling their way out of Scott's mind brain. We all know that Scott leaves plenty of holes in his stories, details or events that are left purposefully made so that we can theorize to fill in those gaps. So what's interesting is that he leaves different holes in each series. And by looking at the two series in tandem, those holes start to fill themselves in with events from the sister series, the sister location. No, just no. Anyway, reading Twisted Ones was like reading the crib notes for Sister.
Hi. Thank you. I finally hit rock bottom when I realized for my 34th birthday, I didn't want to post pictures.
I feel like I should apologize to the whole world because I didn't think it was going to lead to all this. I didn't think it was going to be that bad. I thought reading Empress Teresa was just going to lead to another dumb book. I didn't think I was going to cause all of this chaos. Unfortunately, I'm pretty sure that I opened up some sort of a dimensional rift or enacted some ancient misbegotten curse by reading Teresa and then reviewing it and getting it out to the world the way that I have. Because I'm pretty sure that I have unlocked a biblical plague by doing this. And unfortunately, the longer this review has gone on, the worse the condition has gotten. So I'm just going to finish this off, and hopefully that'll subside the virus. It'll save whatever ancient deity I've pissed off, and we can all go back to our lives. The global pestilence wasn't caused by any kind of authoritarian communist government that murdered witnesses and tried to cover everything up and now is doing everything in its power to silence critics and shift the blame. It was me tripping on some sort of an ancient blood ritual that I didn't understand. So, to the entire world, please accept my formal apology when I say, my bad. Also, sorry that my hair is like this. I've got a shit ton to go over today, and I've got to start early. I couldn't wait for my hair to dry. Alright, so, Empress Teresa, page 307, chapter 20. I'll just go over a few choice points in the chapter. There are a few good lines that I think should be highlighted. Like this one, there's some side plot that goes absolutely nowhere where Teresa has to meet with a negotiator from Saudi Arabia, and she's complaining about it to Prime Minister Blair. And because he said so many disparaging things about the Middle East in general, Norman took this opportunity to try to separate Saudi Arabia from the rest of the Middle East. And so he says this: indeed, there have been terrorist bombings inside Saudi Arabia itself. However, most Arabs would not want to see the end of terrorist organizations. They are jealous of Western society and wealth, and are amused to see the terrorists slap us in the face once in a while.
I hope you can see this because I've been doing it as hard as I can.
Now, skipping ahead a little bit to where Teresa's talking with the Saudi Arabian negotiator. Actually, I'm going to make a quick correction. The Saudi Arabian negotiators, they are on behalf of OPEC because Saudi Arabia is an ally to the United States and therefore would have been seen as a more friendly face to Teresa. At the same time, they have someone from Switzerland, I don't think actually it's a name, who's acting as a mediator in this meeting. And this is all overly complicated. I don't know why they're even going forward with all of this crap. It is an attempt to silence OPEC because ruining them financially was not enough, apparently. So despite openly supporting terrorism, despite the threats that OPEC has put on Teresa, despite Teresa's past behavior with anyone who has shown her the slightest hint of aggression, she decides to very generously reform the Middle East. She starts the meeting by handing out a couple of printouts of the desert of Libya, the desert of Egypt, the desert of Iraq, the desert of Iran. Your countries are all desert because the land is flat. You don't have mountains to make the air rise up and cool off. The air stays hot enough to evaporate rain before it hits the ground. And with that being said, Norman, I would like to introduce you to the American Midwest, which is pretty flat. Afghanistan has quite a lot of mountains. Iran, I actually had to look this up to confirm, but Iran has a number of mountains that are over 10,000 feet. Your claim is bullshit. But Teresa offers to convert these deserts and turn them into France. She points out French Alps, the Swiss mountains, the Austrian mountains, and mountains are the key to having any kind of greenery, I suppose. Teresa also delivers a diamond ball made out of compressed carbon from the sun, which is 82 miles wide. Apparently what she does is she shatters it into millions and billions of pieces and spreads it all throughout the atmosphere, where I guess it just hangs in stasis. And this is to go with her promise for helping the citizens of Israel escape. In 95 minutes, the ball and stream complex came around the corner of the world again, this time giving off much more light. Everybody saw what I was doing. I was eliminating the darkness of night.
They want light. Why, God, they'll get light.
Now, Teresa attempts to defend this decision by claiming this: crime would go down as criminals lost the cover of darkness. Yeah, because crime is never committed in the daytime. That is just a statistical fact. Take that, crime, you shit! Everybody was joyful at the prospect of having 24-hour daylight. Yeah, except for people who like to stargaze, have romantic walks in the evening, people who are like sensitive and need darkness to help sleep, astronomers, astrophysicists, Batman. Oil Island is a success, and they are unloading millions of gallons of oil. And then, because we have to have a cliffhanger, one of the ships sinks. And it's not like an accident or anything. It was attacked by a different boat.
Terrorism.
As the Exxon Maria approached Jersey shores, a 55-foot sports fisherman's power boat headed straight for the tanker's side at high speed. The boat hit the tanker with a titanic explosion. The flash momentarily hid half the tanker's length. Flaming oil poured out of a 60-foot wide hole in the tanker's side. Burning oil spread out over the water. The heat was so intense, other pleasure boats in the vicinity had to back off half a mile. A black cloud of smoke obscured much of the disastrous scene, but flames could be seen. In only 19 minutes, the giant tanker sank out of sight.
I'm done. What? I'm done fighting you. I'm bored. You're boring me.
Chapter 21. So losing the oil tanker was very upsetting for Teresa, and she goes and isolates herself in a room once more, where she is met by Mrs. Parker, who actually does have a second contribution to the story, and it's exactly the same as the first, and it makes about as much sense. A few minutes later, Mrs. Parker knocked on the bedroom door, and I let her in. She gave me a hug. You poor dear. You share the lot of all women. You worry about those we are responsible for. We hope the world will treat them well. We send our sons to war and pray they come back. We see our daughters marry strangers. Our lot is to worry until death.
What the fuck does that mean?
And despite not saying anything that really sums up the situation, not saying anything that really solves the situation, and despite Teresa not even contributing any dialogue, that single paragraph was enough to get Teresa to calm down, come back downstairs, and devise a plan to take on OPEC. And her plan comes back to economic warfare, where she's going to be selling oil at $10 a barrel. The Israelis finally start their exodus in earnest, and Prime Minister Ben gives this really blasé and at the same time culturally insensitive speech to try to inspire them. My friends, we had a long journey and many hardships, but finally we go to the promised land. Teresa has given us a new paradise, free from the menaces of this world. Our children will know no other Israel but the new island, because Israel is where the Israeli people are.
Amazing. Every word of what you just said was wrong.
Okay, so going line by line there, I don't know what this long journey and many hardships are supposed to be. I think the hardships refer to the terrorist attacks that Israel's been struck by. I'm not sure what he means by long journey, like as a broad concept maybe. The Promised Land, that one's horse shit, because they're already there. I mean, which would you rather have? The land promised to you by a psychotic, irresponsible despot, or an actual god? Even though New Israel will be further away from the Middle East, that's not going to do anything to stop anti-Semitism, so that's not going away anytime soon. And Israel being where the Israeli people are, I feel like I actually have to point out that Israel does not function the same way as Asgard.
Asgard is not a place. Never was. This could be Asgard.
Oh, and I want to point out this particular line. Teresa's giving some exposition about how America is going to help the Israeli people resettle temporarily before New Israel is ready or properly settled. People rushed to schools and churches to sign lists volunteering to take in a Jewish family. Millions of Americans had a summer cabin somewhere, or a mobile home, or an empty apartment, and everybody had a garage that could be converted into a bedroom. I don't have a summer cabin. Where's my summer cabin? Mormon's tone deaf to everybody. Hi. How you doing? Right. Through this entire thing, Teresa is propping herself up. I'm going to stop saying, oh, well, this person just praised Teresa. Just assume that every time she does anything, someone praises her and says, oh my God, Teresa's amazing. But she goes on and gives this little false humility speech. She writes a letter for Blair to be read in the House of Commons. Dear Mr. Blair, people say I should be given the Nobel Peace Prize for the Israel situation. It should be given to Prime Minister Scherzer. He's heroic. Anybody would have told him to stay in Israel and prepare for the fight. So what did he do?
Forced out like a bitch.
He came to London to see a girl who had no ties to Judaism, who couldn't find Israel on a map, who had no interest in politics or war, who might not be able to do anything at all about Israel, who might not even care what happened to Israel. Aren't politicians supposed to take care of those things? He threw all his chips in the pot and came away a royal straight flush. Your friend Teresa. The sheer audacity of Norman to make Teresa behave like a 7-year-old all the time and proclaim that she's some brilliant masterpiece character? One, the whole thing just screams false humility. Two, why would she write to Blair about anything regarding the Nobel Peace Prize? Three, why would she start it off that way? Why would she start the letter off that way? Oh, people say that I should get the Nobel Peace Prize. That just screams of narcissism. Four, her endorsement of Prime Minister Ben is laughable at best. Anyone would have told him to stay in Israel and prepare for the fight. So instead, he fled, he retreated, he ran away.
Colonel Manton, I want you to tell your men to run away.
What? Those words, run away. I want you to be famous for those exact words.
So we continue with the chapter. Teresa's 19th birthday is coming up on May 8th, and it's been almost a full year since they were taken in by the Parkers. And I guess Steve is tired of bombing on their house, so they decide to return to America. The question is how. Now, the first suggestion that President Stinson suggests is them coming home on the USS Ronald Reagan. Now, that is the same ship that the atom bomb-laden jet launched from. The ship has been a leper colony since last year. Nobody wants to serve on her. Your presence will restore the crew's pride. I am honestly curious how little of a fuck any actual sailor would give about this situation. Like, anyone watching this who did serve, please comment below and let me know if Teresa, her assassination was ordered from your ship with this plan. Would you care about taking part even tangentially in this stupid plot? And would your pride be restored if she were to sail across the Atlantic one time with you, effectively using your carrier as a personal ferry? Well, Teresa declines the offer because she's not sure what Hal would do, since bad memories of being on the boat and all. So, she does offer to assist the crew with their wounded pride. However, it's not the way you would expect. You see, they're going to play a football game. Teresa's apparently going back to West Point, and when they get there, she suggests that they send the crew to West Point on the 4th of July, where they will participate in a football game. And she'll play the quarterback. You remember, she's got super strength, so that doesn't sound fair. She'd be able to walk in every single touchdown. No one could knock her over. She'll be quarterback. We'll make it an Army-Navy game. To make it fair, neither side can use regular academy football players. The Ronald Reagan crew will be amateurs. The Army has to use amateurs too. The ambassador loved it. What an exciting idea! It will be bigger than the Super Bowl. It will drive the odds makers nuts.
It's driving me nuts.
So for anyone outside of America who's not familiar with our football traditions, we do have the annual Super Bowl. That's its own gigantic thing. But we also have the annual Army-Navy game, which is where you take the collegiate teams from West Point and Annapolis Naval Academy. They compete and Navy wins. So what Teresa's suggesting is basically a watered-down kindergarten version of one of America's most notable traditions in sports. So rather than go home and visit her parents, which at this point I'm convinced she's avoiding for some reason, the Parker estate is turned into a football training field, and Teresa is taught how to be a proper quarterback. Yes, this is real, and because Norman always has to go the extra mile with how tasteless some of this bullshit is, Norman gives a scene, and this is all because of the use of a single word that he should not have used. But we get a scene which is both a statement against servicemen and against women. There were a couple of the sailors who unnecessarily groped at me. This had been expected, of course. I told their leader about it, and he sent them home. I'm pretty sure that he meant she was being ogled or leered, or the men were just staring, and okay, fine, whatever. Groping is different. Groping is very different, and I don't even know how to explain that one. Honestly, it's fucking stupid. And because Norman cannot stay on topic for more than a couple of pages. We get another tangent. We get a scene where they're celebrating the anniversary of her world-breaking 11-mile drop without a parachute. So some dumbass decides to do exactly that and tries to break the record. And so because this dumbass stuntman has not been injected with an alien goo baby, he dies. Shocker, I know. And people start analyzing, oh my god, how did this happen? How did he die? What could he have done differently? Not jump? It's 11 miles in the air. He was so high he needed an oxygen tank to fucking breathe. And then the scene's over. And Teresa just treats the whole thing as like, yeah, okay, well, I'm washing my hands. I didn't say not to do it or to do it. I take no sides in this. Oh my god, this is so dumb. They also put him in a jet without a canopy because to make it easier for the stuntman to jump out. Like,
That's stupid. You're stupid.
ejector seats are a thing? You could have done that. Or, there is that stunt of, I forget what his name actually is, and I don't care enough to look it up, but Red Bull sponsored that guy who jumped out of that pod. So, they could have done that. So after the scene is done, after everyone's washed their hands of this dead stuntman is idiotic plot, Teresa goes on this completely unrelated tangent about how Mr. Parker was a pretty smart guy. Mr. Parker was a pretty smart guy. After a year in England, I developed an appreciation of English conservatism. They kept many old ways and institutions. Consider the royal family and all the rituals that go with it. What's that about? I asked Mr. Parker about that. He talked about prejudice and defined 200 years ago. So I'm just going to leave it on screen if anyone cares enough to actually read it. Short version, it's praising English conservatism and goes on about, how traditions are important and how Pride and Prejudice is good, something of the wisdom of the species. And then she caps the whole thing off with a fool like Derek Eames, the stuntman, wouldn't understand a word of this. What is going on? Did she go on this entire tangent just to mock a dead man? Norman, take your Ritalin! Chapter 22. So it's finally time for Teresa and Steve to leave the Parker estate, where they say goodbye to Mr. Parker, Mrs. Parker, and their children. Oh, did you forget that they had children? Because so did I! Next was the 17-year-old son, John, and 13-year-old Stephanie, who could barely keep her eyes dry, and 11-year-old Jennifer, who was crying like she was losing everything she valued. Yes, because they were such riveting, involved characters. The children, I don't even know why the kids are here, just like to artificially make the Parkers look like a family. As characters, the children's only function is to be introduced. Outside of that, they have no purpose. I walked away quickly. The Parkers and Arthur were left in mournful silence. Empress Teresa, the humble my ass, the humble world saver and conqueror, the right hand of God, was no longer in their lives. I think that would be kind of a relief, because what if you had like a super powerful deity just hanging out in your living room? Like, imagine if you actually had the God Emperor from Warhammer 40k just hanging out with you. I would kind of hope that he would be like satisfied and leave, so I wouldn't worry about accidentally pissing him off and dooming the planet. Oh, go. So this, I pretty much get to skip this entire chapter because there's this needless tension as they are on a plane flying over the Atlantic when all of a sudden everyone just passes out for some reason. Everyone except for Teresa. 20 pages of worthlessness. Now, I say that that's useless because it's useless. Nothing of consequence happens. It's another and a very lengthy series of misadventures that Teresa just bumps into. The reason everyone passed out is because Hal freaked out and had a reaction of being over the Atlantic again, because that's where they were when Teresa had that mighty fall, even though I don't know why he would have that reaction. He was reacting to the wind beforehand, and that's why he canceled out the wind. But they're inside a plane where there is no wind. Why is he reacting like this? He's been on a plane before. You remember the trip from Paris to Dublin, then Dublin to London? That was done by plane. Hal is really, really stupid. I'm not even sure he understands the concept of the Atlantic Ocean. I mean, it's just a different spot on the planet to him. But anyway, Hal nearly murders everyone on the plane. Teresa has to dramatically take over and pilots the plane back to somewhere in New York. And all the while, the whole planet is watching on and inspired by how well Teresa handled this thing. Even though at one point she actually disregards suggestions from the control tower despite not knowing how to fly a fucking plane. They actually suggested that she landed in the water, like, I think they wanted her to land in the Hudson, so we're replicating the Miracle on the Hudson that Captain Sullenberger managed to succeed with. But no, Teresa's a super good girl, so she's able to land on the runway of, can't even find which airport it was, some airport. They land at some airport, and it's perfect. She doesn't even wobble side to side. It is a perfect 3-point landing, and then they go off to West Point. You can cut this entire chapter, and the only thing that happens is Teresa goes from point A to point B. The misadventure in between has no impact on consequence. It does not affect her relationship with Steve. It doesn't affect her standing in the world in any way. It just happened. It's filler. So Teresa goes to West Point. Not to visit, not to do that stupid football game thing we'll get to in a moment, but because that's where they built her new house. Chapter 23. A 3-bedroom ranch-style house had been built for us on West Point, less than a mile from headquarters. As I've said before, I have not served, so I don't actually have the wherewithal to properly call bullshit on this. But I still feel pretty safe calling bullshit on this. And we run into the parents again, Teresa's parents. Meet them at this new place. And we get an interesting revelation that has not been hinted at or suggested or mentioned or anything. Mom! We met and hugged. There were the typical comments of missing each other and how are you? I observed that Mom appeared to be mentally sharp. She was recovered from whatever problem she had a year ago. I should also point out that Teresa chose this spot to get her new house built instead of like one of the undeveloped areas on West Point property because she preferred to see some kind of cadet activity from the window. Now, I don't know if she's bored and doesn't like television, or if she just wants something to ogle at. Makes me think there might be some marital troubles there. Maybe Steve's not performing his husbandly duties too well. Got more media hate. So Teresa spends a few pages building up this football game, and amendment from earlier, she's actually playing alongside Navy. It was the rednecks versus the cream of society. The underdogs versus the elite. The army are the underdogs in this, just so we're clear. And Teresa being the quarterback means that this is going... And Teresa being the quarterback means that this is going to be an absolute sweep. The super strength combined with the aimbot means that every other play should be like a Hail Mary. You just have a row of linebackers defending her. You send 2 or 3 runners downfield where, they scatter and become hard to defend, and she aims however the hell she wants to, and there you go, instant win button. It's like first football game where you win 1,000 points. Well, surprise, surprise, I can actually read you the entire football game in a reasonable span of time. Here it is. Army won 48-36. Oh well, at least people could see the game wasn't rigged to let me win. She spent so much time building that up, hyping this up as this crucial moment for the crew of the Ronald Reagan, and it means jack shit. I'm not even going to go on about how Army won. I'm sure plenty of people in the comments are going to go nuts about that. What surprises me is there was this moment for Teresa to be the super awesome good girl, and she doesn't take it. Like, she actually loses. It's inconsequential, and it means nothing a paragraph later, so it's not a real loss. It's not like Peter Parker's choices resulting in Uncle Ben dying. You know, that's real loss. What I think happened is Norman was writing this scene, and then he got bored about halfway through and just wrote it off as nothing. We don't get any particular plays, we don't get any special moments from the game. It was just, oh, Army won. Okay, next thing. And speaking of next thing, here's the problem with Teresa's finances and how she has too much of it. 5 more executives came in. Jan explained. You have so much money, you can't put more than a small amount of it in the stock market without driving stock prices crazy. There's an alternative. Buy out entire companies. What companies? Boeing Aircraft, Ford Motor, General Electric, U.S. Steel, and Nucor Steel. The book actually tries to explain that it would be a good idea for all these companies to combine into a single thing underneath Teresa's leadership. Teresa declines the offer because it's a really stupid idea. Nothing becomes of that, so what was the fucking point? New rule, take a shot every time a scene can be summed up as a pointless filler. Oh god, what was the fucking point? New rule, take a shot every time a scene can be summed up as a pointless filler. Oh god, So, Teresa decides to start touring New York and goes around doing whatever the hell she wants. When all of a sudden, she starts getting followed by crying Asian men. Yeah. Just outside our front door was an unusual group of people. They were 10 Asian men who looked to be in their 20s, although it was hard to tell. When they saw me, they immediately started crying and lamenting. They held pictures of me, put their hands out, and begged for something. I couldn't tell what they wanted. They spoke in some Asiatic language. And this happens like 2 more times. They keep running into these random crying Asians until like the 3rd time, where they're joined by an 11th Asian man who's apparently South Korean, who explains that the group are from North Korea. They escape, and they're begging for help. The quiet Asian man was motioned to come over. He said, "Please, Miss Teresa, see this tape, and you will know how they suffer." He handed me a videotape. I'll look at it. We went upstairs to put the tape in a VCR. It was a documentary for a PBS channel, and then the tape itself goes on to explain, how North Koreans are badly abused by the government, and how North Korea is an incredibly shitty place. Common knowledge, especially because Teresa has first-hand experience with North Korea being bad, since they shot a missile at her water spouts. Remember that? But of all of this, the thing that really...
Light. I get tired of working for them every damn day. But I've got a nasty addiction for money, so I do what I
You don't need to be Rex.
Yeah, I failed to mention that too much. My place made a move. And it breaks it down.
I am on the right. Huge change.
I am.
That's the plan.
I have him a necktie. Or that is
No, but it sounds tight.
my prince is X's real enemy. I know how to work this.
So let's get started. I guess it's one.
This is the one.
really impresses me is the use of a videotape and a VCR. Now, I can excuse the North Koreans having a VHS. What I am impressed by is that Teresa has a VHS player in 2016. She just pops upstairs and puts it in a VCR like it's nothing. She doesn't go and get it converted. She doesn't have a conversion player. She doesn't go and get it digitized. She just has a VHS player in this day and age because shut up. Well, Teresa is so moved by the plight of the North Koreans that she decided to intervene. So she's going to work with South Korea and the United States to take North Korea down, because nothing's happened in the last couple of pages, so something's going to happen. Now, it was around this time that I started playing around with the idea that maybe Teresa is supposed to be an unreliable narrator. Now, an unreliable narrator, broadly speaking, is a narrator who tells a story with a certain lack of credibility. And there are multiple different ways you can do that. One way could be that they just don't have the wherewithal to really understand what they're doing or the impact they have on others, kind of like Forrest Gump. Forrest Gump didn't really understand what he was doing in many scenarios, didn't have a firm grasp on reality, but had a monumental impact on the culture, the people around him, and that was shown very well through his narration. It was also backed up with cultural references that anyone familiar with those decades would understand. So you're kind of getting two stories in one. You're getting the story that Forrest told himself and was trying to tell the audience, and then you got the story the movie was telling. And I tried to give Norma the benefit of the doubt, thinking maybe Teresa's unaware of how awful she really is. Maybe she's supposed to be blissfully unaware of how insanely dangerous she is, where she doesn't fully comprehend her actions. And I dismissed that idea pretty quickly because it's pretty obvious that Norma does not have the skill to pull off a story that complicated when you consider how many typos there are in this book, how many tangential plot threads that go nowhere, and the fact that this far into the book, just to remind you, the North Pole is still exploding. Teresa has to meet with President Stinson about the plan to take down North Korea. Her plan is a simple one. I'm going to get Hal to destroy every weapon in North Korea. Once all the weapons are destroyed, the South Korean army can move in without resistance and take over the country. But that idea gets shot down by the president because apparently that would create mobs within the country, and when the mobs take over their countries, they slaughter everyone perceived as oppressors. North Korea has 2 million people with government jobs, from the top leader to the lowest city worker. They'll all be killed. The atrocities will make Nazi concentration camps look like vacation resorts. First off, I doubt that very much, simply from a number perspective, because not the same. Second, how? With what tools? With what weapons? The weapons will be gone, so are we talking about people getting stoned to death in mass? Third, are you defending North Korea? So Teresa tweaks the idea and only destroys. So Teresa tweaks the idea and only destroys weapons within a particular corridor. So the South Korean army can march into North Korea unopposed. And Teresa will march with them all the way to Pyongyang, the capital, where she will take over the country herself.
We trade one villain for another.
But it's not just weapons. You've got to understand there are also planes and tanks and atom bombs that you've got to consider. So Teresa over-explains how Hal goes through the country and destroys every one of those in turn. So you got a passage for destroying the firearms, a passage for destroying the planes, a passage for destroying the tanks, and oh my god, I am bored. The way that it works, though, is Hal goes in and detects things based on how they're shaped. So if North Korea, a very secluded, secretive country, had designed a type of weapon that Teresa does not know about, or a particular shape of a weapon that Teresa does not know about, then it's still in effective use. Basic handgun, for example, if you tweak it just a little bit, or you bring in a type of handgun that Hal's not familiar with or isn't looking for. That's still in effect. This is a really stupid plan. Handguns aren't simply, shaped like this and then make the pew-pew go that way. You gotta consider barrel length, magazine size, calibers. You probably have to consider attachments. But no, because Teresa is perfect, then the whole thing just works. The other part of the problem is what to do when Teresa's actually in power, because as she points out, North Korea already has a very particular bureaucracy and dictatorship in place. And if she were to jump in there and instantly change whatever she wanted to, however she wanted to, it wouldn't go over very well. Certain things can't be instantly changed. You can't go snap your fingers and instantly change an economy overnight, as an example. So her decision doesn't sound good. The North Koreans themselves would have to remain in their jobs as before. This would be politically unacceptable to the South Korean citizens. No politician would dare suggest it. Therefore, I would have to run the country dictatorially through the North Korean bureaucracy for a while. But because this would be a military matter, or because Teresa would be acting on behalf of the United States government, they decided to take the safe route, and make her an officer in the United States Army. So she swears an oath of office, a commissioned officer's oath, in the mansion of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Walters. And this leads us to page 388, which is significant because it is the second of only 2 pages that don't have anything worth remarking on how bad they are. Second page with no tabs. Second of 2, chapter 25. Almost done with this. So Teresa has to get a military outfit because she has to go and meet with the president and needs to look official because now she's a sworn officer. There was another thing I wanted. I wanted a male uniform, not a female outfit. I wanted the authoritative aura of a male. And she claims that this is okay because there was a precedent for deviating from uniform regulations, and cites General Patton wearing his revolver and Douglas MacArthur wore a 1920s raccoon coat over his uniform when he was the garrison commander of West Point. Here's the thing, though. For someone who wanted the authoritative aura of a male, she does nothing to try to respect the uniform. There was one more thing. A woman was supposed to wear long hair up while in uniform. I didn't. I assumed nobody would say anything.
Oh, I can't wait for this little Karen in training to tell me all about the military.
Now, uniform regulations are not very popular, but they are important. If you look like a slob, if you are out of dress, if you don't tuck in your shirt, or you don't polish your shoes, or any other number of things, you look like you're not taking your rank, your role, your position of leadership seriously. Teresa, and by extension Norman, does not understand this and goes along. No one even says, "Excuse me, I know you can crush me like a bug without even trying, but do you think maybe you could put your hair up and look at least slightly presentable?" I can only assume that this ties back to Norman's unconscious bias of women with long, luscious hair. He is so attached to that look that he will keep that in the story even if it makes absolutely no sense. Oh, and there's one more thing. Steve thought I looked awful cute in my little uniform. Hun, you never looked better. It turns me on. More than the first time you walked into my college room? Not that much. Thank you, Norman, for this book that is completely devoid of all sexual situations. And anyone in the military watching who is pissed off by that scene, it gets worse. Teresa meets the president, a man named General Walters, and a representative of the South Korean Army in the Oval Office. And President Stinson makes a proclamation. As you all know, Teresa will lead the South Koreans into the North to liberate that long-suffering people. Sensitivity to the feelings of all involved make it necessary that Teresa have the top military rank so her authority will be unquestioned. By act of Congress, Second Lieutenant Teresa Hartley is promoted to General of the Army. The reporters cheered and applauded as... I thought the reporters were bad things. The reporters cheered and applauded as General Walters replaced the Second Lieutenant gold bars on my shoulder epaulets with circles of 5 stars. I was the first 5-star general since the death of Omar Bradley. This is so pompous. Now, for anyone who's not familiar with military ranks, and I admit I'm not an expert myself, but it's not just that someone is a general. There are actually certain ranks of generals, typically indicated by stars. So 2-star, 3-star, 4-star generals, and very rarely you'll have 5-star generals. I believe we have had 8 in this country's history. To just hand a 5-star general rank to a 19-year-old with no military experience, barely any life experience, for a hackneyed and honestly unnecessary reason, spits on the accomplishments of everyone else who have achieved the 5-star general rank. Teresa is made general of the Army despite her age, lack of experience, lack of merit, and having been sworn in as a second lieutenant earlier that morning. She's also wearing service medals and armed service medals just for being in the Army. I don't know how accurate that is, so I'm sure someone else can fill that in. We got more reporters actually applauding her, so are the reporters for her or against her? Keep switching back and forth. The occasion is so momentous that President Stinson gives a gushing speech about how great Teresa is and how people can never tell what she's going to do next. To which Teresa responds via an inner monologue about how anyone else on the planet would have taken this chance to talk about themselves. But not Teresa. No, she's far too humble than everybody else. She's not completely self-absorbed, which is why we've had almost 400 pages of her talking about how great she was despite the massive fuck-ups. She does eventually relent and gives a short speech. This may sound a bit familiar. I'm very simple. I follow my conscience. I am what I do. If you think that's easy, try it for one day. We are saved or damned, not for what we think, but for what we do. If kids understood that they are what they do, and they can change their identity today, there would be no street gangs and teenage prisoners. People's personalities collapse if they have nothing good to do. What is a man that you are mindful of him, and a son of man that you care for him? Yet you have made him little less than a god.
What the fuck does that mean?
And of course, everyone goes nuts about how great that is. The New York Times said my tiny speech would be carved on my tombstone. And because Teresa is Teresa, this eventually leads to talking about how great the Bible is. I was amazed at how this simple idea about being what you do is so completely ignored. It's implicit in everyday speech and human interaction, but nobody explicitly says the idea. Nearly every page of the Bible tells us what we should do, yet the Bible itself never explicitly states the idea the Ten Commandments are a thing. It also ignores that the Bible on multiple occasions says, if you do this, you will go to hell. Also, fun fact, did you know the Bible has like 27 different verses about poop? If people hadn't figured me out by now, they never would. It's because you never explain yourself. I've read this whole book and I can sum you up in a single paragraph. Religious narcissist ingests God sauce, becomes despot. Teresa begins her plan to march on North Korea. She meets with a 2-star South Korean general named Sunwoo. And one day after getting this started, she's met with some bad news. General Sunwoo meets with her for breakfast and states, I have bad news. The North Korean leaders have ordered the people of Pyongyang to attack us when we enter the city. With what? Pointed sticks? She destroyed all the weapons.
He's got a board with a nail in it.
So they're worried that with all of the active duty us when we enter the city. With what? Pointed sticks? She destroyed all the weapons.
He's got a board with a nail in it.
So they're worried that with all of the active duty soldiers in North Korea getting called back to defend Pyongyang and all the civilians being drafted, I guess, they're going to be facing a force of about 5 million people. We will be outnumbered 100 to 1. I believe we will be defeated. You'll be going against unarmed civilians, many of whom have no military training. And at the risk of sounding cruel, I recommend you look up the Battle of Agincourt. Numbers alone do not define a battle. Also, technological advantages really make the difference. You're talking a force of 500,000 soldiers not being able to take a badly coordinated mass of what are basically human shields, armed with pointy sticks and rocks. But despite overseeing one of the most easily led military victories in history, Teresa sees this as a bad thing and goes back to her room to sulk. I wish Steve was here. I wished I was back home with him. I wished Hal had invaded someone else. He has brought me nothing but problems and anxieties. You're one of the richest people who ever could exist. The magnitude of personal gain you have used these powers for is so enormous that you collapse the real estate market of whatever suburbs you walk through. She continues to sulk until she actually gets a call from Prime Minister Ben, of all people, who basically just says, hey, thanks for helping us before, and that's all she needed to hear, because now she's got a great new idea of how to access Pyongyang, and she only has to destroy several economies to do it. She looks at a map and studies the Korean Strait and the Sea of Japan, and notices that there are some geographical conveniences. Between South Korea and Japan were two islands, Jeju on the left and Tsushima on the right. Yesu could be, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, I'm sorry if I'm not. Yesu could be moved straight down, but Tsushima was in the way. If I moved Tsushima just 50 miles to the east to rest next to the Japan mainland, I could move the entire Korean peninsula 70 miles south. Yeah, Tsushima is largely a fishing exporting island. If you do that, you will destroy their economy. That's like 80% of what they do. And again, this is just basically the same thing that she's done before with her powers. Some big miracle needs to happen, so she just fucks with plate tectonics. The big creative use of her powers comes down to a move really big thing. The generals looked at me with a variety of expressions. Some looked sympathetic, some annoyed. All looked like they were thinking I was an amateur general who didn't know what she was doing. Gee, I wonder why! So eventually she moves these islands.
Sure.
Of course, she doesn't tell anyone about it, so God knows what the people on the island are thinking. It must be terrifying to see their island moving. And eventually Korea is moved 70 miles to the south. And I skipped like 10 pages to explain that. There's some problem about like flooding in some areas below sea level, but I don't care. And it doesn't lead to anything anyway, so why go over it? So the plan was that this incredible display of strength was supposed to get the North Koreans gathering in Pyongyang to come to their senses